Home Depot used to employ a full-time staff of retired tradespeople.
I worked in the Lowe's paint department for a couple of months. Before that, I had been working at Benjamin Moore selling paint, and I was furloughed during the pandemic, and my family moved states. I didn't want to go back into sales, didn't know what I wanted to do, but possibly wanted to open a Benjamin Moore store in the future, but I'd never worked retail. When I worked in the service industry, I was a chef, so I was always back of house, and I didn't want to open a retail location without knowing if I could hack it in retail. So I got this job at Lowe's in the paint department. I was way overqualified, right? Like, I had been training architects and interior designers on how to specify paint for 3 years at that point. And so I knew that I'd be overqualified, taking a big pay cut, but it was worth it for me for a short amount of time. When I got there, I was one of 2 people that had any paint knowledge whatsoever. The other gal that did had worked at a Benjamin Moore store for like 40 years or something, like a really long time, back when stores still trained their employees. The other employees were younger and were just, working a retail gig. They weren't making enough money for them to give a shit about their jobs. I wasn't either. So they didn't, which I was totally valid. I thought, and what I was told when I was hired, was that I would be working at the paint desk, sort of keeping the area generally like tidy and then helping guests. What I learned pretty quickly was, on top of those things, which is a full-time job, I would also be in charge of stocking, because they no longer hired people to stock overnight. This was in the middle of the pandemic, but from what I understand, this has just been a continued thing, that they either have just skeletons, stocking crews, or no crews at all. I also ended up having to cover the decorating department, which was on one side of me, and the tools department, which was on the other side of me, pretty regularly, while being either the only person in paint or one of 2 people in paint, because they hired such skeleton staff. And while I knew a lot about paint, I knew next to nothing about drapes and blinds, which is something that we did in the decorating department, and very, very little about tools. Like, I can operate a power tool, but I wouldn't be qualified to tell you which power tool to buy. On top of that, we had huge shrinkage and loss in the paint department, because paint supplies are very expensive. And when we had either one person or no people effectively working in the paint department, shit would just grow legs and walk away. The shrinkage in the months that I was working there, they did like stock, and it was astronomical. Which, instead of like hiring more people to cover the departments so things wouldn't walk away, they just installed locks on everything, which would just piss off customers, because everything would be locked up and there would be no one in the department to unlock it for them, or we would be in the middle of tinting or helping another customer. So it would just create big issues. And because we didn't have anyone stocking, and it was our job to stock on top of everything else, we would routinely have customers come in who had checked stock online before coming in, so they thought, with good reason, that we would have like a ton of stock of something, and they'd come in and the shelves would be empty because the stock was either sitting on pallets in the warehouse and that had never been brought down, or it was sitting on pallets in the middle of the paint aisle, because they would just drop shit in the middle of the paint aisle and expect us to unload it, which we would do when we had time, which meant that we were hauling paint cans up and down ladders, and using the scissor lifts. I was never actually trained on a scissor lift. I was just sort of told, get on up there, champ, and I did, because I had to, but that doesn't seem terribly safe. I think we were technically supposed to have training on that before we did it. I also was one of 2 people in the paint department with any knowledge on paint, and paint is one of those things that is quite technical, and you really need to know certain things before you purchase paint, or your project is not going to turn out well. And so I would be doing a lot of the customer interaction, which I really enjoyed. But my other coworkers who were not ever given that training were just not empowered to know anything and to help customers. So they would have questions and they'd have to say, like, I don't know, which is really hard on retail workers. Like, I know going into stores and, especially hardware stores where you need help, is really frustrating when you go in and there's no one working, or the people who are working don't know what they're doing. But as a former employee, it's really frustrating to be asked questions that you just don't know the answers to. It's embarrassing. And customers get angry because they expect that you have this knowledge that you were never given. And you're not making enough money to make it worth it. So I was only there for a couple of months. I loved working in the paint department. I actually genuinely did. But working for Lowe's was awful. And I got offered a job that made more money, so I left immediately. But yeah.